Okay, welcome again to a new episode of the KewCast. I'm John, and I'm joined again by my good pal, Eddie. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Johnny. What's going on?
Oh, living the dream every day.
What's your dream, John?
I don't know. I don't
all
know
day, every day.
My dream varies each day, but I'm liking this journey I'm on. Yeah, so
awesome.
Not bad. We have a pretty stacked show today. We're going to talk a little bit about the PPA event in Tucson, the Tucson Open over the weekend, and get into the paddles of the week. We had a couple of little battles.
Yeah, I love the showdown, man.
Another
so
two
fun.
showdown. Yeah, another two showdowns. Also, a pretty deep dive into how to clamp a paddle for PBCoR, and doesn't matter if the paddle is allowed to swing freely or if you clamp the crap out of it or loosely, right? We'll get into some of that. And then Q&A, good sir.
Do you have that clamp handy?
Not with me.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can always go grab it off the...
I could do some B after.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's get into it. I wanted to talk first about a little bit of latest news before we get into the PPA Tucson Open. I'm flying to Florida tonight to interview Gabe Tardio tomorrow. So
You just got back from a trip.
I just got back from Boca. I'm going back to Boca Raton.
Oh, my gosh.
But yeah, I wanted to chat with him about being Ben's new partner as well as his equipment. Like, what does he think about his paddle? All right. So,
You got to get some playtime in?
maybe. So,
all right. Nice.
Yeah, I heard that he is drilling with Ben tomorrow, so maybe I'll see them both drilling, and I'll get in there as the third drilling partner. Really mess up their game. Anyway, I wanted to chat with Gabe about being Ben's partner, if they have any plans there, strategies, and also his equipment. Because as far as I know, he's playing with he's sponsored by Pickle, by KKL, and he's playing with the Vantage Pro, which is, a Gen 2 paddle, but it's not by any means a power paddle, right? Does he like playing with an all-court paddle, or does he prefer, is he moving toward a power paddle? We'll find out. If you want me to ask any specific questions, please leave a comment in the YouTube section, in the comment section of the YouTube video. Leave them quick, because I do have to interview him tomorrow.
So, John, you've played with this paddle. Any memorable thoughts about it? I don't have any takeaways from my time with it.
Very little I've played with it. Mostly I played with the Hurricane Pro model, and that one I like a lot. It's all-court leaning very heavily toward control.
Tons of spin, as I recall.
Tons of spin, yeah. And yeah, the Vanguard was a little more power. It's an elongated paddle. But still, I think from my recollection, I need to hit with it again. It was, according to current standards, it would be all-court leaning control. Not as much control as the Hurricane, but leaning that direction, So kind of where most Gen 2 paddles last year fell in terms of firepower. But also good spin, good feel, kind of a softer face as far as I recall. So that'll be exciting. Next week, going to Las Vegas for that JOOLA event.
Right?
Yeah. It's unfortunate you can't come, Eddie. Everybody was wishing you were there, including the folks from JOOLA.
Next time. I'll get my JOOLA time in some of there.
Right. What's funny, though, is JOOLA originally sent out this email weeks ago saying, hey, you're invited to this event. We'll work out the details later. But we invited a couple of content creators. That was their words. And now, I've been chatting with different paddle reviewers. Literally, every paddle reviewer on the face of the planet will be going to Las Vegas to this JOOLA event. So
I'm really happy I'm not going.
I don't know how they're going to accommodate everybody, but my goal is, I don't know if this is going to be possible with so many people there, is to do the same thing, similar to what I did last year, and interview Ben Collin, Anna Bright, Tyson, Simone, whoever's there and whoever's available for interviewing. So again, if you have specific questions you'd like me to ask any of the JOOLA pros.
Awesome. That was a great interview you did last year.
Thank you. I never published the full Ben interview, and he talked about some mental game stuff I'd never heard him talk about. Maybe I should drop that before next week,
there
just
you go.
as a memory. And let's move on.
Speaking of Ben and JOOLA.
Yeah. Let's move on to the Tucson Open. So Ben was seen last weekend playing with the new JOOLA Perseus 4, which is presumably why we're being invited down to Las Vegas next week for the event. I actually did get a chance to hit with that when I was in Boca Raton 2 weeks ago. Now, briefly, I played a few points with it, and it hit very similar to the 3S, not the Gen 3s, so dialed back like the 3S is. And from my recollection, it seemed pretty heavy. I don't know if I was playing with a prototype, but it seemed heavier and denser than the 3S.
So do you feel like it was dialed back even further?
I couldn't say based on the... Plus, I had just gotten there from Colorado, and the difference in the way paddles hit in Florida versus Colorado is vast. So I was trying to calibrate the humidity and temperature in Florida and
air density and everything else.
Everything else. So I don't really have a great feel for it other than I would say it does hit similar to the 3S. Sounded just like the 3S. So I imagine it's a similar Gen 3 technology peninsula diving board thing going on. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess. We'll find out next week. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that paddle is. Now, Ben was playing with it, so I imagine it falls at the same firepower level. Ben has moved on from his original Perseus, which was at these days all court leaning control, maybe right in the middle of all court. But the 3S is entry-level power paddle. And I imagine that's what the Perseus 4 is. But did you notice Ben playing any differently with that paddle than... Did you watch much?
No, I didn't watch any of it, actually.
Nothing. Okay.
Other sports activities going on.
What was that? Yeah, well, that's all I'll say about the Perseus 4. But Hayden was also playing with the Franklin C45. I did notice a vast difference in the sound of Hayden's paddle this tournament versus the last tournament he was playing. Remember the last tournament? Just
very deep throat,
very
right?
bassy, right? This one sounded like the C45 that you and I have, like we're right behind you there.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when we played with these that they weren't even close to what we were observing.
Yeah. So interesting there's such discrepancy in the sound of the paddle. I don't know if that translates to power, as you would expect a bassier paddle to hit more like the Yola Mod, et cetera. I don't know. But yeah, did you? So you didn't see it, but at one point, I think it was in the semis. By the way, Ben and Hayden were playing together for this tournament. Ben and Gabe will be playing together for the next several tournaments. Anyway, at one point, we've seen Hayden do this before, like to Travis Rettenmeyer, but he did a full send at Andre and just pegged him like right in the chest shoulder area. And to Andre's credit, he just took it and walked back. Didn't seem too upset. But I'm just like, man, this is just kind of becoming standard. Like we first saw
Jay
DeVilliers.
Yeah.
We first saw him try that against James Ignatowicz, missed him, and at that time that was a big deal. It was like, oh my God, he hit the ball as hard as he could. And now we see even Ben John's done it toward Guangdong, and now it's just kind of a standard part of the game. So my question is, kind of related to that, is kind of this new pickleball we're seeing played, which is kind of this hyper aggressive, speeding up from the ankles and Guangdong style pickleball. Does it have more to do with kind of everyone getting better and an influx of younger players coming into the sport, or paddles becoming hotter and allowing those kind of extreme body bags? What do you think, Eddie?
Well, as with most things, it's probably a lot of everything, right?
A mixture of both. Which one would you say is more?
I don't know if it's necessarily a generational thing, but I do think it's just the overall style of play has definitely gotten faster from what I've observed. A lot less focus on drops and the soft game, and everybody's going power.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a 20-year-old, 25-year-old thing. Everybody's doing it.
Yeah. The reason why I brought up the young thing is we see mostly the younger players in the PPA and the pro tours doing that more than the more established players, and I think it's just because that's it's a newer style of pickleball. It's just going to pick up on the younger people more, but. So I guess there's two arguments to be had there. So if a case for kind of younger players is that we see Guangdong doing it with a paddle that's not a power paddle before he, became a free agent. He was playing with the Selkirk Power Air, which is not these days by any means a power paddle, right? And he was able to just rip these wicked drives and speed ups and everything with a non-power paddle. So that's kind of evidence that maybe it's a new crop of players or players are getting better, et cetera. And then the case for it becoming hotter paddles is leading to different play style is look at Andre Daescu. So he recently switched from the Proton Series 1, so that's sticky surface paddle, right? Which is not a power paddle by any means, more of a control-oriented paddle. And now he's playing with this Flamingo, which is a Gen 3, which I haven't hit yet, but it plays similar to a JOOLA 3S from what I hear, right? Or probably a little more powerful, right? So he is playing differently with that paddle, I've noticed. So, he's playing much more aggressive. At one point, he caught Hayden with a low flick from the ankles, and it's hard to catch Hayden, Patrick, when off guard. He's got wicked fast hands, right? And Andre did it. And I don't think he could have done it with the Series 1, and that's probably, he knows that too, and it's probably why this is enabling him to become more aggressive. So, like you said, I think there's two arguments to be had, and I think there's a balance of both. But, I mean, honestly, if I had to choose one having more influence over the other, I think probably the paddles becoming hotter would be my guess.
What are your thoughts on how to handle those types of players strategically? I mean, I know you've spent time with Scott, and I don't know if this has come up or not, but when you're going up against a player who is kind of a known body. Exactly. Do you change your mindset? Do you change how you prepare for defense?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll ask Scott that specifically and have a segment on that show about it.
I mean, it's really difficult because with the power paddles, the reaction time is nothing, if anything, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, you have to be thinking, okay, how do I prepare for this, not how do I react to it?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what is that mindset?
I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. One is like the extreme full sends where it's just wind up and demolish the ball. I don't think there's any way to really prepare for that. Maybe there is, but then there's like the Gabe Tardio kind of aggressiveness where it's weird, non-traditional flicks from here and there, and you don't see it coming, and all kinds of weird stuff. So that I think could be addressed with the drill that you and I did last. So that 2-player cooperative instigator drill where you just sit right across from each other at the kitchen, and you just do these flicks here and there. You experiment with speeding up and targeting the shoulders and the chest and that sort of thing. And then it just teaches you on the defending side how to be constantly on that, red alert. And anticipate rather than just react, like you said.
One of my go-to mindsets is that if the ball is low on the offensive player and I'm playing defense, I know that my defense doesn't need to even consider like a waist down defense.
Yep.
So I'm already thinking up, close to the upper part of my body, right? Because why waste the mental energy in anything sort of belly button down?
Yep. Yeah, you've gotten so good at the Scorpion, this pancake Riley Newman sort of thing. You didn't used to have that from what I remember, and now these days, every time I speed up at you, as soon as I look down, your paddle's up, and I look up and it's coming right back at me. So it's just you can imagine the teeter-totter effect. Like if the ball's down, even if you're just dinking, there's a potential they could speed up, hold your paddle up in a straight line going over the net from that paddle, from that ball, the opponent's paddle. And if they dink it, no foul, right? You just switch your
and
gears.
if it's above where my paddle is, if I'm crouched down, that ball's going out, right?
Yeah, right. Good stuff.
Fun stuff, yep.
All right. Let's move on, Eddie, to paddles of the week.
No new paddles, but we had time for a couple of showdowns.
Yes, indeed. By the way, since we're on the topic of new segments, we are open for sponsorships, not paddle companies. We don't want any conflicts of interest, but athletic apparel, I'll reach out to Centerline again. I'm sure they'll be open for it, but I'd love to get some new sponsors. And consistently each week, our Paddles of the Week is the most popular segment, and that's open for sponsorship at this point. So reach out to me. If
one of my favorite segments, as you know.
Absolutely. So we had 2 showdowns this week. We wanted to do a little edgeless showdown again, so we brought out the Ruby Infinity and compared that to the Holbrook Aero Titanium. Let's talk about that one first.
Sure.
So the showdown is just you and I play a game of skinny singles, and we record the scores, one with each respective paddle. We switch paddles, play another game, record the scores there. Sometimes we go to a tiebreaker, but in this case,
we rally scoring to 8.
Didn't need to.
And then we flip.
Exactly. And yeah, this is pure science, like I said. It's physics, down to the...
I'm guessing we could do the exact same test today and probably come up with something different.
For sure.
But maybe ultimately, and in the long run, we probably would come up with similar sort of overarching themes as far as paddles go.
Yeah. The way I look at it is this gives us an opportunity to compare the paddles head-to-head and give our thoughts on how the paddles play. And it's a fun way to kind of... conceptualize that, put it in a game format.
Exactly. So game 1, I started with the Ruby. Mm-hmm. You had the Holbrook, and you beat me down again.
No, it wasn't a beat down. I think it was 1 point difference, right?
I had 8-5 in your favor.
Okay. Yeah. So
that's a beat down in rally scoring.
With the Holbrook. Yeah. So my thoughts of the Holbrook as I was playing with it, and it's similar to how I remember, is they do have that internal weighting at, I think, just on the top edges of the paddle, not at the bottom.
It's not the corners?
Could be all 4 corners.
Okay.
I think it is all 4 corners now I think about it. But that certainly helps with an edgeless paddle to shore that up. And we also added some tungsten. So this is half a gram per inch pickleball effect tungsten tape. And it looks like I added about 5-6 inches on each side, starting from the neck and going up along the edges. So enhanced. And this first game, the Ruby was played stock.
Yep.
So I'll explain what I felt on the Aero. This is an elongated paddle. It is fairly light, but weighted up. It's still lighter than most elongated paddles. Even with the weight, there's a little bit of instability side to side. You hit it a little off the sweet spot, and there's kind of a twisting. I think it could use more weight for sure, particularly, at the 4 and 8 o'clock to prevent it from having too much swing weight. But I do like the feel of the ball off the face, and this titanium softens it up a bit. And I noticed compared head-to-head with the Ruby, this had more pop. It was more of a pop-oriented, firepower balance versus the Ruby, which is more power-oriented. And we all know the definitions of those. So pop is like the short strokes, like the punch volleys, and then power is the full swings, like serves and drives. So what do you feel about the Ruby in the first game?
Agree with your assessment about pop versus power, but on those power drives, man, this paddle feels so buttery. I mean, drives coming off of this Holbrook.
The Holbrook, okay.
Felt very nice, just creamy smooth.
Yeah.
And I really like the feel of those drives. And the drives are very predictable. I mean, there's some paddles where you get a wonky launch angle for whatever reason, CG or whatever it may be, but this one is just so predictable.
Yeah.
With those drives. I did feel the lack in sort of twist weight, sweet spot dimension, but I enjoyed playing with it.
Yeah.
Very predictable.
I would also call the Ruby a kind of a buttery feeling paddle.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was impressed with both of these, including the Ruby. So second game, do you have the breakdown
Second game, we switched. So I was playing with the Holbrook, and you were playing with the Ruby. And you beat me again, 8-7, very close.
Did I? I thought you beat me on the second game.
All right. It's very close.
Okay, yeah.
It was 8-7, I remember that.
So my individual score is
you beat me the second game.
Did I?
Yeah.
Well, my individual score is that the Holbrook, I got 1 more point out of the Holbrook than I did with the Ruby.
I had 2 extra points, so.
With the Holbrook?
Yeah, we need to hire an accountant or something.
We're coming at this, we're just coming at it from different directions in terms of how we perceive the scores. But yeah, I would. So to be fair, the first game was played without weight on the Ruby because the Ruby Infinity is actually, you can play it stock. You don't need necessarily weight. But I think weight still does enhance it for me anyway. So the second game, I played with, some added weight to the Ruby. A little bit less than I put on the Holbrook, but nevertheless, you can see that 0.5 gram per inch tungsten here. And I think that it did improve it without making it too head heavy, just broaden out the sweet spot. I would head to head again. I would say this is more power focus, so with big swings. Definitely not a power paddle. I would put this currently at all court leaning control, both of these. But yeah, there's a different balance of power and pop in these two paddles. Overall, the sweet spot on the Ruby felt a little better. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just a little wider paddle, and I think there's also some kind of internal weighting system going on. I need to X-ray this. I haven't yet. As far as I know, they're not putting anything like lead in it, like Holbrook is, but maybe they're adding some additional carbon fiber strips here and there to internally weight it. Like I said, it does feel pretty good stock. One thing I did notice is the Holbrook gets better spin. Then the Ruby is able to shape the ball better with the Holbrook, and actually, you can, now that I'm touching them, you can definitely feel a texture difference between the two. But in the second game, I got exactly the same scores with the
weight.
Yeah.
Yep.
So basically, like I said, the Holbrook edged out the Ruby by 1 point. I would, in terms of my personal preference, I like both of these equally. I don't have a preference for either one of these paddles. I think they're both great. When it comes down to it, if you like, hybrid shape paddles, then the Ruby Infinity's your paddle. If you like elongated paddles, then the Holbrook Aero is yours.
Yep.
Do you have a preference between one of these two?
Well, I really like the Ruby Infinity. It's very pillowy, very soft. I'd say it almost doesn't play like an edgeless paddle. I would agree there's something going on in there in terms of weight distribution to kind of bring out the best of an edgeless paddle, whereas the Holbrook really kind of feels like a traditional edgeless paddle. The quality of the 6.0 offering is just outstanding. Mm-hmm. I mean, the feel of it, sort of the density of it, it just feels really high quality, whereas the Holbrook, not quite to that level. I mean, the edges are chipping off on the Holbrook. It's got sort of a cheaper feel, but that Ruby Infinity is just so nice.
Yeah, I think you can see the chips on the Holbrook clear because there's white underneath the black. I do think the edge chips pretty easily on the Ruby also, unless they've done something differently. But the original Infinities chipped really easily. Anyhow, by the way, both of these paddles, two of the best looking paddles on the market.
I
Look at
totally
those
agree.
suckers.
I'm a sucker for an edgeless paddle, and these two are some of the best two out there.
Yeah, and just the graphics and the colorways, just wow. Those two are some great looking paddles.
If I was a true control player, I would probably go with the Ruby.
Yeah, I agree.
For its just pillow softness and just very controllable. I like to drive the ball more, and for that, I would probably lean towards the Holbrook for me a bit of a not a pop advantage, but a power advantage.
Okay. Overall firepower advantage. I would edge it to the Holbrook. I do think it has a poppier profile versus power, but that it's got a longer handle, longer overall length, so you're going to get some leverage with that. So if you were to put weight in strategic spots for power, like along the top, then you could certainly generate a lot more power then.
But in our showdown, very close scores. The Holbrook taking the edge just by a nose.
Yes, sir. Let's move on to our second showdown. So we pitted the Selkirk 008 to the Carbon TruFoam, and this was a request by one of the YouTube viewers.
Wings of Peace Toronto.
Oh, thank you for
You're welcome.
grabbing that name.
Kind of our full foam showdown this week.
Yeah. So I think this is a fun comparison. Now, we already talked about Carbon TruFoam. Like we did a showdown last week, didn't we, with the TruFoam, or a week before?
Week before against the Franklin.
Okay, yeah, that's right. But we wanted to do it again because I think this is a more appropriate showdown between two all-foam cores.
And they could not be different. More different, really.
That's right.
I mean, the 008, very much a control paddle along the sort of the same DNA as the Lux, and the 003, very soft. Again, very pillowy. Carbon, definitely more of an all-arounder.
Yeah, for sure. So I put the Carbon in my review, and I still feel this way as, like an entry-level power paddle. There are some reviewers that put it in all-court leaning power. I put it in power leaning all-court. So, yeah, it definitely has a firepower advantage over the 008. And by the way, both of these are weighted up. I put a lot more weight on the 008. It starts much lower static weight than does the Carbon. And we compared the Carbon 2, which I'm more used to the Invictus shape from Selkirk. But what were the results of the first game?
So game one, I started with the Carbon, and you had the 008. the score was 8-3, carbon.
You won. All right. Yeah, you smoked me on that first game.
Yep. And then game 2, we switched. I had the 008. You had the carbon. I had it at 8-7.
You won that one again, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So overall, the carbon won by quite a long shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, for both
pretty
of us.
significant.
Yeah. And that's my preference too. If I had to choose between these two paddles, it'd definitely be the carbon TruFoam. It's not to say that the 008's a bad paddle. You know, I'm liking it more as I play with it more.
It definitely needs that extra weight for just that little bit of kind of force behind the ball.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But without that, it's just control all day, and I can't really make that work.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just me.
So beyond kind of how we played with them, our overall scores, how do you feel they compare in terms of the feel of the paddles? Because they're both foam cores.
They both feel pretty amazing to me. I mean, the carbon, they say that the break-in's supposed to be minimal. I feel like the break-in is actually not substantial, but there is some break-in. The break-in's not so much in power and pop, but it's in forgiveness and feel, in my opinion.
Right.
So I just wanted to make that note, but that in particular, that number 2 shape, sort of that wider body.
Yeah.
I think there's enough control there, but I mean, the pushback on the foam, it just gives you that extra power and pop that the 008 doesn't have.
Yeah, true. I do feel like, I mean, they're using different types of foam. We don't know exactly the type of foam Selkirk's using, but it's not the same as the foam. And by the way, we don't know exactly what type of foam, as in TruFoam either. They're both proprietary and they aren't releasing exactly what formulation of foam they are. But I do think that they play quite differently. You know, you can feel that they're also different from polypropylene and Gen 3s. And so what I'm loving about all this is we're getting new technology coming into the paddle space. It doesn't play exactly like all the other older technologies. And, you know, I think clearly foam is here to stay. And all foam is probably going to be a big thing this year.
Do you think all foam will slowly kind of take over the marketplace?
That's a good question. We'll see. Yeah, I want to say yes, but man, polypropylene is a stubborn material, and people still love to play it the way it plays. And we all know how to play with polypropylene. So I don't think it's going away that quickly, but I do think that foam is definitely here to stay.
I'd love to see some of these all foam paddles utilize some more perimeter weighting because I think there's room for some additional forgiveness in these paddles.
Especially in the 008. Now, they're using a different foam, which is much lighter than the TruFoam. There's not much room to add internal weight to the TruFoams. You know, they play great stock mostly because they're already kind of maxed out to the static weight, according to most people's standards. Some people love to play with heavier paddles, and there's plenty of room. You know, I don't know why I was able to put weight at 3 and 9 on this paddle and still get away with it, but I do like this weight balance, maybe because I'm just used to it, because it starts, for a wide body paddle, it starts pretty high, both stock weight and balance point. But something about this, I just really liked this.
It took me a minute to get used to that extra weight because these carbons are fairly high on the swing weight scale for the dimensions that they have.
But not the stock weight of these 008s is minuscule. So I feel like Selkirk definitely missed a bit of an opportunity to just tweak the internals with this, add something.
Can't imagine it would be very difficult.
No. But, you know, future iterations, maybe the market version of this Labs paddle will have some new weighting inside of it.
Lots of fun. So just to recap, our edgeless showdown, Holbrook came out on top just marginally. Showdown number 2, a full foam. Clear winner there.
Yeah.
Carbon.
Yep. That was fun.
Yep. Keep those suggestions coming. We love it.
Yeah. Don't let us know what the next showdown should be.
How about a geared deep dive, John?
A deep dive.
Not a deep dive.
All right. So, you know, I published a couple of videos last week about a bunch of videos were published in the pickleball space about the USAP media event, and I also compared my trip to Boca Raton for the PPL lab and what they're doing for coefficient of restitution, and compared that to what happened at USAP Media Day. And a big question in all of these videos was, why are they clamping the paddle so that it's allowed to rotate after it's hit? And you and I covered this a little bit several months ago, or a few months ago anyway, on the podcast when this whole PBCoR idea was floated, and some of the original videos showed this rotating clamp, and I was like, that doesn't seem right.
Right.
You know, and I talked with Brian Fitzpatrick from Graffiti, and I was like, we did a little experiment between the two of us because I was convinced that holding the grip tightly would produce a different outbound velocity than loosening the grip.
I mean, intuitively, that's kind of what we learn when we're trying to learn the game of pickleball, right? When you want to soften up those shots, you keep your hands soft. So it seems like it would translate to this scenario.
Yeah, and it definitely works. You hold the paddle tight in your hand, it's more likely to shoot off uncontrollably versus soft,
So
5 out of 10. Well, our original experiments, I was wrong. And, I did this little swing pendulum test out here. So it's a really low speed COR, like 12 miles an hour. And I clamped the paddle tightly, did it. I clamped the paddle so loosely that it would fall out of the clamp, and went back and analyzed it, and it was the same result. There was a little bit of difference, but it was just, contributed that to error. Brian did the same thing with a little bit higher velocity. He shot a ball at paddle, clamped solid. I don't know what the inbound speed, but it was faster than mine. And then literally propped the paddle up on its butt cap and shot it, and the paddle just flew off. And surprisingly, the same outbound velocity. So we were like, if Brian had a clue better than I did from the beginning that maybe it didn't matter how tightly he clamped the paddle. So our initial results were, doesn't really matter. If it swings freely, it's going to give the same results. Now, there's been a lot of questions, particularly since kind of some wonky results have been coming out from USAP with their PBCoR, like some control paddles are scoring higher than power paddles that in the real world we know shouldn't be, So there's been some concern that, well, what about the pallets on the handle of the paddle? Now at USAP, they take the stock grip off the handle and then they clamp it on a solid piece of steel that's allowed to rotate. But there's still the pallets that shape that octagonal cross-section on that handle, and some of those are made from soft EVA foam, the squishy handles. Some of them are made from molded PU, which are harder, and some of them are entirely carbon fiber, right? So there's hard ones and there's soft handles. So the question was brought up at the USAP media event that wouldn't a soft EVA foam pallet behave differently than a stiff handle? And John Anderson from USAP was like, yeah, that's a potential. That's a good point. The soft pallet might be a spring. We need to look into that. We haven't yet. So that's been a source of concern. And then while we were in the room, they're actually shooting the cannon, the performance cannon of the paddles. Somebody else asked John, how tight do you clamp it? Because I had video of it too in my video. They're literally taking a wrench and tightening these two bolts that loop over the handle. And John's response was we clamped the shit out of it. That's what he said. And that's become a meme. How do you...
Is that what the gauge says?
Right.
Shit achieved?
Right. So, and I don't think he got a chance or didn't explain fully why maybe they think that doesn't matter, in the same way that Brian Fitzpatrick and I figured out that maybe it doesn't matter that you're clamping it. So anyway, source of concern. So I reached out to Brian again, and we've had an ongoing conversation about this. And I also reached out to Keith, so he's the engineer who's building my speed gate, and he's been helping me enormously with all the PBCoR and Canon stuff, and he's been there, guiding me through all of this. And I asked both of them what their opinions are just a couple days ago. So Keith, I'll put a video he sent up, but he compared it to baseball. And he's of the opinion right now, and he says we don't know for sure, but he's of the opinion that the pressure of the clamp doesn't really matter. Now, if you go to baseball, and they've actually tested a baseball bat in this regard, and it makes no difference how tightly you squeeze the handle on the outbound velocity of the ball. In fact, there's a video of a pro hitting a home run in baseball, and he let go of the bat before the ball hit it, and it still went over the fence, right? Which is mind-boggling, right? Now, secondary follow-up to that is, all right, well, he's providing some velocity of the bat going at the ball in the first place. But in theory, that shouldn't matter. So you're swinging the bat at 20 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour, or whatever. That's just compounding the outbound velocity based on the inbound velocity of the ball. Whereas if you, let's say, for an example, let's say the bat was swung at 50 miles an hour and the inbound ball was coming at 50 miles an hour. That's 100 miles an hour total. So it should be the same with a stationary bat and the ball coming at 100 miles an hour. Shouldn't make much of a difference. So the tightness or looseness of the grip in a baseball bat doesn't matter. And the reason they figured this out too, and I'll put this chart up on the B-roll of video, is that there is a vibration frequency that travels from where the bat is hit down to the handle and back eventually. That the ball leaves the bat before that vibration frequency ever gets to the handle, especially the cap of the handle. It gets close to your hands on the handle, but it doesn't have time before the ball leaves for that vibration frequency to have any effect on the ball. So whether or not you're squeezing it hard on the handle or you don't have a grip at all on the handle, doesn't matter. Question is, does that also apply to pickleball paddles? Now, pickleball paddles are much shorter than baseball bats, so it depends on how fast that frequency goes. And I'll bring Brian Fitzpatrick into this conversation now too. He is also wondering, he's kind of revising his original thing now, is that maybe pressure does have an effect if you bring into play certain things like the pallet stiffness on the handle and that sort of thing. That could potentially change the vibration frequencies and cause that vibration to actually have an effect. So short answer is we don't know if clamping the handle stiff or not has any effect when you bring in other variables such as the stiffness of the handle itself, right, which could change that frequency. I'll also put up a video. So Chris Olson and his brother Isaac had a 10,000 frame per second high-speed camera, and we've all seen this probably, but they hit the Gearbox Pro Power elongated with it and showed what it looks like at that crazy super slow-mo hitting a ball. And they actually drew a grid on the back and the front of the paddle. And the shot from the back of the paddle is really fascinating. The whole paddle, you can see the ball coming through the back of the paddle, cupping it, very much a trampoline effect, and then shooting the ball off. And Brian Fitzpatrick actually brought up the fact that if you look at where those vibration modes are going, you can see waves going through the paddle, bouncing off the edge of the paddle, and coming back to the center of the paddle right at the simultaneous moment that the ball is leaving the paddle. So he's saying that is the ideal, like that vibration frequency, that whether it was purposeful or not, whether or not Gearbox engineered it that way, that was leading to the extraordinary power that the Gearbox Pro Power elongated was getting, because it was timed perfectly. Now, clearly it's going to be different for different types of shots, but hitting with a heavy power shot sends those waves, and it bends enough into the face that the ball's leaving right when those waves come back to the ball. Pretty cool.
That's how I would define a trampoline effect.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Sounds like it.
Effect. Right.
It's even more so.
Yeah. And even that is up for debate, whether or not that interpretation is correct. So suffice to say, we don't know, needs to be tested, and we will see. And I also don't know how exactly the PPL lab for the EPA is clamping the paddles with regard to the handle and the intensity of the clamp, and whether or not it's clamped tightly or not, or if they're taking off the original wrap. That's something I didn't really unwrap while I was there. So I'll ask them. They'll be glad to give me the answer.
What are your thoughts, like just intuitively or anecdotally, about like if you were to clamp a paddle on the sides of the face versus a handle, of how that might change things? Yeah.
Intuitively, I think that it would be a less accurate way of measuring the paddle's potential for energy return. And just because that's not the way you're holding it in real life, maybe it makes no difference at all. But there's also the issue that instead of clamping it at the handle or having that, you're moving into the sweet spot a little bit and maybe reducing the effects of the trampoline effect. So maybe it's skewing the numbers that way. So
or flex in the lower part of the paddle face.
Yeah. So I don't think. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think that would be advisable. But what do I know? I'm an archaeologist who likes to hit paddles.
It has an air cannon in his basement.
Yeah, so I'll put the video of the home run being struck with a paddle of the bat that's not even being held, which is fascinating. I'll put up some other B-roll stuff too. But yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about for the deep dive.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Want to jump into some questions?
Let's do some Q&A.
Speaking of video, a couple of viewers want to see the hole in the wall that you shot with your cannon.
Yeah, it's right over here.
Let's plug that in the video so we have a permanent record of the damage that you've done.
By the way, Eddie, I had more fun with the cannon this weekend. So I had my boys this weekend, and my 11-year-old was very keen on the cannon in his dad's basement. So we came down and I was showing him, here's how to pressurize it, and we kept cranking up the pressure.
Okay.
And it turns out that a plastic pickleball can in fact break a paddle at speeds of 200 miles an hour.
Please tell me you have video of that.
I do. It's a slow motion video. But I never would expect it. I thought the ball would be obliterated before the paddle.
I don't know. I could see it.
But it
especially with a holeless ball.
And I never expected this to happen. But I was using the same ball, the same paddle that you and I, this Chorus Fire, their SX shape, and it hit dead in the sweet spot, and a crack formed on the edge coming down to the center, and it just blew off the edge guard. Was
that like 100% power?
That was bananas. No. Not even close.
I bet you could blow a hole right through a paddle.
So that was at about 30 PSI. This has a capacity to go to 220 PSI.
All right, let's do it.
Blow a hole. We can blow a hole in the wall of this studio with a pickleball.
By the way, we should play a game with a holeless ball.
Yes, we should. It's a very different game.
That would be so fun.
Yeah.
All right. The first question comes from Rick Dorner, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because the question is kind of long. But essentially, it boils down to the kinds of paddles that pickleball companies are sending to us as our viewers.
Okay.
Many times they are pre-production or early production that may be somewhat different than what ultimately goes to consumers. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, he uses the 11.624 power paddles as an example of how, some reviewers have said that the production units would not be as gritty. So, your thoughts on that, and where do you stand in terms of like documenting this for things like your database?
Right. Yeah. Great question. And it's been a source of consistent frustration for us paddle reviewers. And to defend 11.624, they're one of the best, I would say, out there in terms of sending us paddles early that aren't prototypes, that are production models. They wait to release the production models until we've had weeks to experiment with the paddles. So I think they're doing it right. But what happened with that, and it's not a secret, is that the paddle manufacturing factories in China will send out paddles for reviewers, not tell the owner of the paddle companies with extra grit. And we've known this is we suspected this has been happening. And the reason, I don't know, I don't want to get into the reason, but clearly, paddle that spins better is going to get more favorable reviews. Now, we've been onto this for a while, so we're always kind of waiting for the most recent iteration. And to David, owner of 11.624's credit, he sent us these paddles and said, hey, we figured this out. These are a little less gritty. The reason why we don't want to release the same level of grit that you all have is because it's pretty close to the limit, and we don't want another carbon gate, right? Where we get busted for being over the RZ limit. So it's all on the up and up with David 11.624, but it's just kind of a general pattern with regard to grit. Now, the broader picture that the commenter brought up the question for, clearly it's an issue, especially with kind of the fallout that's happening right now over the rhombus ripple. Actually, I just got off another 30-minute session with Thomas and Zane at the Dink for the Pickle Pod. They wanted to figure out what's happening with the ripple, and I called Dong this morning got his side of the story again. And, I think what's happening is that things have been a little loosey-goosey, in terms of regulations. And especially now that something as big and impactful as PBCoR is coming along, that's got to get tightened up real quick. So the reason I'm saying all that is because Dong wasn't entirely clear, according to his side of the story, that, okay, he got 2 versions of the Ripple approved, the R1 and the R2 shapes, which are that went through full approval. Those are on the approved paddle list. But then he made some iterative changes to the paddle to fix the edge guard issue. He sent out some, what we were calling the beta versions now. Beta 2, I forget the terminology, but the ones that had really bassy tone and super powerful. Then Dong said, those weren't supposed to be sent out. Pretend like you never got them. And we're like, wait a second, what? And then the production model, the second production model came out, and it had the PBCoR stamp on it. And in Dong's mind, again, he was saying these iterative changes, we weren't sure if we needed to go through full certification. So yeah, we had full certification on the first one, and then we did the prototype certification on the second one, and we thought we had the green light to go mass market with this, but it turns out we didn't. And then USAP had him overnight some paddles. A week before launch, they failed, and the day before launch, they informed Dong he cannot put this on the market. Hot mess. We got caught up as paddle reviewers in this whole hot mess because there's some opacity in terms of what exactly is a certified paddle, right? I was still looking at the original ones that were approved and thinking, okay, if they're still on there and they're still called the same thing, why is there reason to suspect that they're not still approved? Now, I suspected a little bit, and in fact, I recorded my review of it before it was launched, and then I didn't publish the review because it never was launched, right? But in my review, I was like, this is an amazing paddle, but I don't recommend buying it because I think it might get delisted.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of attention on this once it hits the market. It's going to be a hugely popular paddle. And once people start complaining, USAP might take scrutinize it a little more and delist it. So it turns out that did happen, but before it was ever released. This is probably a good thing, in my opinion, but I don't like the way it happened, and long-winded answer, but I'm going to be a lot more cautious moving forward and request a lot more communication and information from the manufacturers sending me paddles with regard to, is this the final approved one, and do you have documentation? We can't really take people's word for it anymore. Not that Rhombus was lying to us, but according to him, he didn't even know. And, I kind of understand that because neither did I, neither did we. But now that there's this, big event that happened and kind of this blow up, it's really important now for us to know that what we're talking about on the podcast, what we're reviewing for sure, is the same paddle that's going to end up in the hands
100%.
of the people that buy them.
Yep.
And with regard to what do I do with the database, I change it as the paddles change.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Very thoughtful answer, John. Thank you. Question 2 from another Rick. Rick Hicks, would you recommend a Vapor Power, one of your favorite paddles these days, for a 3.25 player? Currently playing J2K and thinking I would like a little more power.
J2K power, you said?
Well, he's playing with J2K,
okay,
but would like a little more power and is thinking about the Vapor.
The Vapor, okay.
Is it appropriate for a 3.25?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not that it's leagues above 3.25's ability to manage it, and I think think about a paddle that somebody below a 3.5 or below a 3.0 could play with. I think primarily, how's the sweet spot on this paddle, right? And what type of player are they?
Yeah.
Now, if this person, what's his name?
Rick.
If Rick is very much a control-oriented player, and that's where his game is, then I would not recommend the 11.624 power. But he's power curious, right? He wants to know if he can get into the power game, right? Or at least he wants a power battle. So knowing that about Rick, then yeah, definitely say that, because the sweet spot's there. It's not like it's so powerful or such a big jump from the J2K that there's no way he could ever control it. That yeah, I think it's a really solid entry-level power paddle.
You know, these paddles aren't that expensive to begin with. For me, a better starting point might be the Pegasus power model. Wider sweet spot, I think probably a little bit easier to maneuver. Sort of jump in there before going full bore into the Vapor.
Yeah, I think that's a possibly good way to go about it, but he is playing with a hybrid shape, and
Yep.
you know, the Vapor is also a hybrid shape, so it might be more of a easy transition for him. But if he has the opportunity to test both models, then I think you're right on the Pegasus in that it does have a broader sweet spot, more controllable. Although it's very poppy. Did you notice that with the Pegasus?
Yeah.
It has more pop than, not surprisingly, because it's lighter.
Even the all-court is not really lacking.
No, it's true. maybe move up to the all-court first.
Yeah, there you
go to the power. But by the way, I didn't put up my review of the 11.624 power paddles yet. I will. I haven't recorded it even. But did you see that it sold out in 1 minute? The Vapor in 1 minute. So I was like working on my review that day. Goodness. I was going to put it up later that day, and I'm like, well, I guess I got plenty of time now. There's more coming. He's got a boatload coming for another release later this month. So I think next week I'll put out the review. But holy cow, that went fast.
Word of mouth has been strong with this paddle.
Yeah.
How about another question, John?
Let's do it.
This one from Howie B., frequent commenter, and we really appreciate that, Howie. He plays with the Pulse V, loves it, but notices that most of the ball impressions are at the top half of the V, or even at the kind of the very edge. Should he get a hybrid instead? He tried the Pulse S, didn't care for it, and is thinking maybe the 11.624.
The Vapor.
Yeah. But do you do that? Do you look at like ball impressions?
Oh,
And yeah, me too.
I do. When I play with standard wide body paddles, I hit them close to the top. Yeah. And that's just something I do. And I wonder how long he's been playing with the V, because I do notice the longer I play with it, the more dialed in I get to the sweet spot, and it comes down a little lower. But the V is one of those paddles that I don't mind hitting it closer to the top. I don't feel such a drop off in the sweet spot up there that it's not manageable to hit it.
Yeah.
And so
it's not like a Paddle Tech ESQ that's got that kind of dead zone
exactly.
at the top.
Exactly.
It's pretty even, right?
Right. And so, you know, I'd say if he's happy with the way he's playing with it, don't switch. Not yet anyway, until something is wrong with the paddle. You wear down the grit too much.
Have you hit with the X?
Yeah, it's a good paddle. You and I just got another copy of it. It's a solid paddle. I love this new shape they've come up with.
That might be an interesting experiment for somebody that's kind of hitting closer to the top.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, that's not to say that the 11.624 Vapor Power isn't an exceptional paddle, but he's already playing with an exceptional paddle. Unless he's really feeling like he can't find the sweet spot on it, then I'd say stick with it.
Boy, that V does have a really nice sweet spot, so if you're not finding it.
Yeah, maybe switch paddles.
There you go. All right, another question. Seems like making a paddle that is ridiculously headlight could get a lower PBCoR. And when players get the paddle, they could just load it up as they wish and sort of dial in the power as they see fit. What are your thoughts on that? Is that how it even works?
I don't know exactly yet how it works, but I will find out. Now, great question, because the MOI is part of the equation, the PBCoR equation. So it's not just a simple equation of dividing outbound by inbound velocity and getting that ratio. Some other things go into it. So MOI is moment of inertia, and that brings into the equation swing weight. So swing weight does affect the PBCoR result. Now, I don't know exactly how or how much it does, but I will find out with my setup. Now, my setup, like I said, I'm not claiming that I have as much accuracy as the labs do. I don't. It's going to be less accurate. But I will be able to see trends across paddles, and I will make these results publicly available, which I think is going to be the advantage or the interest in my setup here is because, okay, how do paddles relate to each other in terms of PBCoR? We don't know. We have a little bit of knowledge, like we know the upper limit. We know that the gearbox Pro Power elongated and the mod TA15 were sunset, so clearly they're over that limit. But how does every other paddle come into this equation? We don't know. So I'll find out how they relate to each other, and it's going to be fairly accurate, not as accurate as the others. But I also want to figure out how this MOI factors into the equation, and is there a loophole where it's accounting too much for swing weight? And like the commenter said, well, yeah, if you make it a really headlight paddle, and that's the way to get a lower PBCoR, then that's a great way to game the system as a paddle manufacturer. And you give somebody a paddle that weighs 7 ounces and has a 12 centimeter balance point, and then they just add a bunch of lead tape to the top of it, and they've got a power paddle.
All of a sudden, they've got a cannon.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's a really interesting concept, though.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. And do I think that the agencies and labs have figured it out entirely? I don't think so. I think more experimentation is probably necessary. In the same way that the PPL is now qualifying balls, If you're throwing a ball at a paddle, you need to have the coefficient of restitution of both, right? Because if you only have it for the paddle, there's some variation in the balls too, even if they don't have holes. So that's pretty important. And not only do they get the qualification COR for the ball, but they do it by quadrant at PPL. So I think USAP, after the media day, is probably going to start doing something similar in qualifying their balls too, but currently they don't.
Well, that's it for our Q&A this week, John.
Okay, I had okay, so I want to have one more question Q&A, because I promised them. I said, good question.
Oh, that's right,
We'll cover it in the podcast. So this is from user 86309. 8675309.
Yeah,
there's a 7. There's a 7 and a 5 missing. So John and Eddie, in comparison to your old favorite main, the Pulse V, so I didn't really main it, but I did play with it pretty extensively. I did like it a lot. Would you consider the Carbon TFG2 an upgrade and worth changing? They looked at our spider charts on my website, and it looked like a perfect numbers matching crossover. But I just don't know if the performance difference is worth the change. Swing weight, balance point, slight bump and pop and power. But I'd love your thoughts on the sweet spot and forgiveness comparison. That's a good question. What, you want to go first?
No, you go first.
All right, so comparing the Apes Pulse V to the TFG2.
Okay.
Carbon TruFoam Genesis 2. Both wide body paddles, similar shapes, and like you said, the spider graphs overlap and match up pretty well. In my experience, the TFG2 edges out the Pulse in terms of overall firepower, right? In terms of overall sweet spot, definitely the Pulse edges out the TruFoam. And overall feel, I would say, goes through the Pulse as well. Now, both of these break in, not in a traditional sense where you think more and more power like a Gen 3, but they break in terms of becoming more plush, more forgiving. And the Pulse definitely has more of a break-in, becoming plusher, more forgiving than does the TFG2, although that does the same thing to a lesser extent. So my sense is that if your goal is, control, if that's more of a priority to you, and control being ability to reset balls, the soft game, finesse, and the biggest sweet spot you can go with the Pulse. If you are less concerned about the sweet spot and more concerned about some put away power, particularly in the realm of pop, then go with the TruFoam.
Good analysis, John.
Yeah. Do you have any variances there?
These are two of my favorite paddles right now, and I've got them both in the bag. I'm not done with my analysis yet of the Carbon. I'm still working through that. I like the way both of these play. The dwell time for both is fantastic. The feel on both is top tier. These are probably the top two in terms of just my sort of feel of the paddle. I would agree with the sweet spot, and even more so because the Pulse is light enough in swing weight where you can add even more weight to it.
Yeah.
The Carbon is already a pretty heavy paddle out of the box, and there's really not a whole lot you can do with it in terms of weight unless you're not sensitive to that, which is fine. So, for me, it's kind of a draw. I love them both. I would say that I would lean right now to the Pulse just because of feel and sweet spot.
Okay.
I feel like the power of the carbon does not offset sort of the gains of the Pulse right now because the Pulse is, for me, plenty powerful.
Okay.
There's plenty of put away there for me.
I like it. I will bring in another variable, and that's durability. Now, we don't know for sure if the TruFoam is going to be as durable as carbon claims, but I have a hunch it will be one of the more durable paddles on the market. It's simple inside the core, and like I said in the review, my biggest concern would be disbonding between the facing materials and the foam. But man, they put so much epoxy on there, you could tell they really thought about this, and it was really even hard to slip a knife in between the foam core and the facing layers. So, I do think that's going to be more durable probably than the Pulse. And we're hearing like the Apes Pulse tend to crunch when you press on them after they break in, and that's not because the polypropylene core is crunching and it's compressed like most other crunching you hear in cores. It's because those carbon fiber tubes that hold the foam in the edges, those 3 layers of foam, are in some cases breaking, in some cases come pre-opened from the factory, so the foam expands outside of those. Now, that's what's causing the crunching, and the foam is open cell foam, so it's breaking down a little bit in there. It's not as much of a concern to me as crushed cores because it's not going to fundamentally change the nature of the paddle. In fact, it loosens up a bit and actually plays a little better when this happens. But I don't think that the lifespan of the Pulse will be as long, as a hunch, as the TruFoam will be. So if your goal is ultimately, durability in addition to these other things, I might edge out the TruFoam over the Pulse.
I will say I'm really looking forward to the new shape that Carbon's been talking about, the kind of a new hybrid shape. Mm-hmm. And if they could do some additional modifications to the weight of this paddle, even push out that weight a little bit to the perimeter, that could be really good. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that hybrid too. They said it's going to be Aero curve, probably very similar to the standard 6.0 teardrop shape, So I'd love to see what that TruFoam would play like in that shape for sure, with a longer handle than the 2. Right. Yep. And back to Apes Pulse for one more second, they have, according to that, fixed, or even against public demand because everybody loved the way that broke in, they fixed this issue of the foam expanding outside of the carbon fiber tubes. So the X's, the latest iteration of the X's we have, do not have that. And I've heard from others who've played with it more than I have, like Dustin, the Pickleball Medicine. He loves this X, and he says it opens up in the same way, but you don't get the kind of crunching. I never had that crunching in my V. Okay. So it could be that mine's a little bit later on the production schedule. Yeah. Anyway, good questions, everybody. Thank you so much. And please leave questions in the comments section if you want us to answer them next week. Or suggestions for a showdown. We love doing those. Absolutely. Great show, John. Eddie, thanks so much. You bet. Great sitting across from you as always, and I'll see you next week. Will we? I won't be here next week. I'll solo this bad boy. Right. Guest host.